For many out there, including many of you possibly watching this video right now, you dream of being a star in Hollywood or a similar field that has created many stars in the past. When you look at the performers of today, you often hear of rags to riches stories, or ones that feature a person having the right role at the right time to help propel them to the next level of stardom. Just as important, you hear about the fall from grace stories, or the tales of those who we never really knew, because who they were on camera weren't the people they actually were behind the scenes. Even in the golden age of Hollywood, actors and singers struggled with various things, and at times, even despite their stardom, it left them broke. We'll show you some examples right now. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. 7. Judy Garland. Yeah. We have to start out with someone that pretty much all of you know from a single song that came from a legendary film, but Judy Garland was so much more than that in so many ways. Sure, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz may be her most famous role, and it's arguably one of the best films in all of Hollywood's long history, but she was a true star in all the ways that matter, and those who got to know her were always better because they had Judy Garland in their lives. Or at least, that's mostly true. While many have nothing but positive things to say about Judy Garland, including her daughter, who became famous herself, there were many in Judy's life that didn't have her best interests at heart. She was one of many legendary actors who became addicted to drugs and alcohol, and she couldn't kick that habit. It also didn't help that she wasn't exactly the best with picking her romantic partners. She married 3 times, and her third husband had no issues spending his wife's money on various things like businesses, which took her $40 million fortune and left her with almost nothing. As if all of that wasn't enough, she also apparently owned millions to the IRS by the end of her life. In short, while she was a great woman, she was her own worst enemy at times, including letting people take advantage of her and not doing anything about it. However, even at the end of her life, which ended in the 40s, she had a clear goal: support her children. She did all sorts of lower-tier singing and performing jobs just so she could make enough money to keep them going, and that should tell you all you need to know about Judy Garland. Even at her lowest, she always knew what were the most important things in her life. 6. Errol Flynn. In many ways, Errol Flynn was the typical kind of Hollywood man in the golden age. What we mean by that is that he had the look of a star, and people gave him roles that allowed him to flex his acting chops while also looking great on screen. His role as Robin Hood is still considered timeless to his day. However, he was absolutely his own worst enemy, because like many stars that would follow him, he wouldn't exactly be the best at managing his own money. He lived the Hollywood lifestyle to a fault, spending excess amounts on things like yachts and living up his Hollywood lifestyle. That would backfire on him in various scenarios, including him being taken to court multiple times. One was for a crime that he was acquitted of, but it drained him due to the legal fees. Then, when he divorced one of his wives, she took a large chunk of his wealth with her in the settlement. Even some of his movie projects near the end didn't work out like he'd hoped, and one film actually left him in debt when he lost the investors for it. As such, much like Judy Garland, he had to do lower-tier work to try and keep going. Yet it didn't last too long, as he died at the age of just 50. It's hard to hear that some of these all-time classic people died so young, and yet that was the Hollywood curse in many respects, and you'll continue to see that going forward. 5. Dorothy Dandridge. Not unlike many other aspects of American life, there were certain social barriers that many had to break on their own, because no one had done it before them. Dorothy Dandridge was one such woman, as she was the black woman to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress back in 1954. That period wasn't exactly the best for people of color, and yet she was shining on the screen, and her voice was something to behold. On screen, you were captivated by her, and yet, the reason many of you may not know too much about her is that she faced the harsh realities of racial discrimination. Those at the top, aka white people, were doing all they could to hold her down, and that is exactly what happened due to the state of Hollywood. As such, She struggled to keep going and kept making poor decisions that would affect her life until her death in her 40s. She was so broken mentally that she died via an overdose of antidepressants. That says a lot about how bad it was for her, that she needed something like that to try and take the pain away. One can only imagine the heights she would have climbed in full if she hadn't been hindered by those who saw her just for the color of her skin. 4. Buster Keaton. Now let's go really old school here, shall we? During the age of silent films, when voices couldn't be heard by the audience, it was up to the actors themselves to help convey things through physical actions, dances, and routines to help entertain people. No one was better than Buster Keaton. In fact, he was so good at what he did, he not only made a fortune from the films he did during the silent picture era, but there is a term called Buster Keaton in movies for how certain things are done. So, what happened? Ironically, it was sound that helped doom him. Once actors were able to talk and sing for the camera, studios wouldn't let someone like Buster Keaton do the things that he wanted to do on camera, and that hindered the films he wanted to produce. Then, the Great Depression hit, and things got even worse for him and the rest of Hollywood. Add that to divorces and limited work, and his once sprawling fame and fortune were anything but abundant. To his credit, and unlike many on this list, he didn't give up, and he kept making projects, albeit smaller ones, all the way until his death at the age of 70. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't rich either. Yet he did what he loved until he died, and that's something many aspire to. Thus, his legacy endures to this day for both his work on the screen and his dedication to keep going with his passion off it. 3. Bela Lugosi. For many in Hollywood, regardless of the era, there is one curse that can cause them both incredible joy, followed by incredible frustration. That is being typecast or being remembered solely for a single role throughout much of their careers. We can name many who fit this role, but one who had this happen in the golden age was the late Bela Lugosi. While many of you might not recognize that name, you'll probably know of him as the actor who played Dracula in the earliest Hollywood films. His presence helped make the character a terrifying presence, and for many, that is how the infamous vampire looks, and definitely not the many, many interpretations that Hollywood has thrown out over the years. And while he was incredible in that role, that's what many people expected of him going forward. He was to be a horror villain and nothing but, and that put a heavy strain on his finances all the way up to the end of his life in his 70s. He never hated being remembered as Dracula, but he was someone who wished he could have done more. He was so poor at the end that Frank Sinatra actually stepped up and paid for his funeral bills. 2. Bud Abbott. For a time, there was no greater comedy duo than Abbott and Costello. They were so great at what they did that during World War II, they helped raise over $85 million in war bonds that helped the Allied war effort. Talking about making an impact without firing a shot. Yet even with their fame, both Abbott and Costello had many woes, with their biggest one being the IRS repeatedly coming after them, including demanding they pay $500,000 during that war bond effort we mentioned. When Costello died, Abbott kept trying to go forward with his life and career, but with jobs minimal and the IRS ever hounding him, he struggled deep into his 70s. When he did pass at 78, he still didn't have enough to cover his debts, further proving that life can be funny, and it can be cruel. 1. Sammy Davis Jr. For those who know some of the glorious circles that formed in the golden age of Hollywood, you'll know all about the wonder and smile that Sammy Davis Jr. had. He was one of the legendary Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. That led to him getting much success in both music and movies. The man was worth a lot of money. The problem was, he knew that. He was one of many stars who decided to throw away his money on opulence and luxury items versus investing it and ensuring that he lived happily throughout his life and not just for a period of it. Given that he was a staple in Las Vegas, it shouldn't be a surprise that he was known for gambling quite a bit. But he was also infamous for having multiple houses, cars, and more. As if all of that wasn't enough, he wasn't the best at paying taxes, And the IRS doesn't care if you're a celebrity or not. You must pay your taxes. As such, even with his health declining, Sammy Davis Jr. did performing gigs to try and recoup some of the money that he had frivolously spent. Sadly, it wasn't enough, and when he died at the age of 64, and even after all of his assets had been liquidated, he still owed millions to the IRS. Before we get to how things ended for Sammy Davis Jr., we need to zoom out for a moment and really look at what all these stories represent. Because by now, this is clearly more than just a list of celebrities who fell off or had a few bad years. This is a pattern, a painful, repeating pattern that runs underneath the surface of Hollywood's golden age. And honestly, beyond that. When we think of Hollywood, especially during that mid-20th century era, we tend to imagine perfection. Big stars, flashing cameras, red carpets, movie premieres, glamorous lifestyles, endless success. But that's the illusion. That's the image that was sold to the public and believed by fans for generations. The truth? It was much darker. Behind that glittering curtain was a reality filled with manipulation, pressure, exploitation, and heartbreak. And almost no one was immune to it. Not even the biggest stars. These legends didn't just go broke. They were built into brands, into products, into icons, and then torn down by the very system that elevated them. Studios controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. What they said in public, how they dressed, who they dated, and how often they worked. If a star spoke out or pushed back, they were branded difficult and quietly blacklisted. It was a golden age, yes, but only for the studios. For the performers, it was often a gilded cage. Now imagine growing up in that machine. Like Judy Garland, groomed for fame, pushed into the spotlight, praised for her voice but given pills to control her weight, her energy, even her mood. She wasn't alone. These performers were handed fame without freedom, fortune without guidance, applause without peace. And when the cameras stopped rolling, many were left isolated, overworked, addicted, and surrounded by people who saw them not as human beings, but as dollar signs. And let's not forget, some of these stars were actively sabotaged because of who they were. Dorothy Dandridge made history as a black woman in a white-dominated industry. But her success was always conditional. She was exoticized on screen but marginalized behind the scenes. Studios didn't know how to market her beyond certain roles. Critics often downplayed her talent, and audiences weren't ready to embrace a star who didn't fit the mold. So no matter how bright she shined, the doors always stayed half shut. Or take someone like Bela Lugosi, immortalized forever as Dracula. A legendary performance, no doubt. But he became a prisoner to that role. Typecast, creatively limited, and passed over for parts that could have shown his true range. And yet, he never stopped acting. He kept grinding, kept showing up, even as the roles got smaller and the paychecks got thinner. Until eventually there wasn't enough left to bury him, and it took the generosity of Frank Sinatra to ensure he had a proper funeral. You see the trend here, right? These weren't lazy people. These weren't reckless people. They were dedicated, hard-working, passionate individuals who gave everything to their craft, and then were chewed up and spit out when they were no longer convenient. Many didn't have business managers or legal advisors looking out for them. They weren't taught how to manage wealth. And when they lost it all, there was no safety net, no lifeline, just silence. Some tried to claw their way back, booking small gigs, touring the country, doing club shows, appearing on radio spots or late-night programs, anything to stay afloat, anything to feed their families, anything to be remembered. But in the public's eyes, they were already yesterday's news. And while all this was happening, one constant remained. The government didn't care how famous you were. The IRS always came calling, and more often than not, they came with big numbers. 6 figures, 7 figures, years of back taxes, interest, penalties, threats of seizure. Some stars had their homes taken. Others watched as their personal belongings were sold off just to pay down the debt. and that's if they were lucky. Others passed away still owing money, with their estates mired in legal battles for decades. Even in death, their legacies were complicated. Their names lived on, their performances lived on. But behind the iconic status were deeply human stories. Stories of pain, of poor decisions, of betrayal, of survival. Stories that remind us how quickly things can fall apart, even for the people who seem to have it all. That should tell you quite a bit, wouldn't you say? Him and all the other actors and singers we've talked about so far had a true peak in their lives that they wanted to last forever. And yet, that wasn't to be. Many of them died incredibly young, and they were hardly alone in that fate. So while it was the golden age of Hollywood as a whole, it was also an incredibly dark time for the many people who had to fight just to get through it. We hope they all have found peace in the life beyond. And that's all from the realm of Hollywood and the many stars who had the brightest of lights upon them, but then fell apart for one reason or another, leaving themselves in ruin. Does it break your heart to hear these tales from Hollywood's golden past? Does it make you even sadder to realize that there are stars right now who are doing similar things to those from the ages long gone? Do you know another celebrity that would be worthy of this list? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.